Welcome back to the Naughty Dog Reviews. Real quick, I want to apologize for the bad audio quality in that last review. That was the first video I made with a PC, so I'm still trying to figure out how the sound and everything works. It should be better for this video, and if not, again, I'm sorry, and please don't unsubscribe. Please. I'm begging you. Anyways, this week we're talking about the sequel to the 2007 hit Uncharted: Drake's Fortune. Being the first in the series, Drake's Fortune was obviously the most rough around the edges when compared to its sequels. Still an enjoyable game, just a little dated. With Uncharted 2, Naughty Dog took one look at Uncharted 1 and said, "We can do better." Let's get started with this review of Uncharted 2 Among Thieves. It's a well-known fact that in the world of movies, sequels aren't often as good as the original. When it comes to video games, however, it's usually the opposite, and Uncharted is no exception. Uncharted 2 fixes basically every complaint that I had with Uncharted 1. First off, my biggest problem with the first game was how repetitive it was regarding the gameplay and environments. While it's still primarily shooting and climbing, they've made both of these things much more dynamic to keep it feeling fresh. The things you climb are much more varied, which in turn makes it feel satisfying to traverse through these areas. Before, the majority of climbing took place on regular walls or cliff sides. Now there are things to make it feel more natural, like signs, street lights, and even a moving train. This game literally opens with you waking up inside of a train that's hanging off the side of a cliff, and as you climb up that train while breaking everything you hold onto along the way. I'm starting to think that these games actually make more sense when you're playing as Donut Drake, considering 90% of the things Nate grabs onto fall to pieces as soon as he lets go. There's literally a section where several soldiers walk across a bridge towards him and nothing happens, but as soon as they're gone and he walks across... Anyways, before I go any further, I should probably talk about the story because by now y'all know that's how things roll around here. Before I do though, I want to mention that from this point on, I'm not going to hold back on spoiling the events from these games, at least as far as the Naughty Dog reviews go. At this point, these games are pretty old, and I imagine anybody watching my reviews on them is more here to hear what I have to say on them and not decide whether or not they should play it, so consider that your spoiler warning. Anyways, after the whole hanging off the side of a cliff thing at the start, we're thrown into a flashback sequence that begins to show the events that led up to the opening. We start with Nate being reacquainted with Harry Flynn, and these two definitely have some history together. We're not exactly shown any specifics, but what we do know is that they've worked together before. Along with Flynn is an ex-girlfriend of Nate's, Chloe Fraser. They tell him about a job that they're working on to steal an oil lamp that at first glance seems completely worthless. That is until Nate helps them understand a passage written by Marco Polo that shows that the lamp actually has something he hid within it that points towards his lost fleet of ships, which are also full of treasure by the way. Let me just say that the story here is so much more engaging this time around. It's a much more complex story that's told out of order and has plenty of plot twists. That opening train scene takes place about halfway through the game, and starting it here was a wonderful choice as it made the pacing feel perfect. It immediately gives you the drive to keep playing so you can see just how Nate got into such a horrible mess. And the characters this time are even better than before. We have some returning characters such as good old Sully and Elena who are as great as ever, but we also have some great new characters like Chloe Fraser and Harry Flynn. There's an interesting love triangle between Nate, Chloe, and Elena, but you know he's got to choose Elena because while Chloe seems like fun and all, Elena plays Crash Bandicoot. Harry Flynn is a complete dick, but he has some great banter with Nate towards the end that makes it impossible for me not to enjoy when he's around.
I don't think you're going to get your stomach through there. There you go. Statue of your mom. Oh look, it's a life-size statue of your ego.
My favorite new character, however, has to be Tenzin. Tenzin is a Tibetan explorer that accompanies you through the ice cave and tank chase part of the game as you search for his family. He doesn't speak any English, so I don't understand a word he's saying, but do I need to? Just listen to this.
He has such a way with words.
Now the actual control scheme in this game really hasn't changed much, if at all. Fortunately, there really wasn't anything wrong with it before, so no complaints from me. What has improved, however, are the actual combat scenarios. Uncharted 1 pretty much pitted you against nothing but pirates, aside from the zombies at the end of course. You're now up against a full-on army of men, led by the power-hungry Zoran Lazarevich, who is a much more compelling villain than before, as proven by the fact that I can actually remember his name. These men are much more of a threat, with all of them being at the very least armored, and at the very most...
Mom, can you pick me up? I'm scared.
The enemies are still quite the bullet sponges, but at least this time it makes more sense with all of the armor that they have on. The variety of enemy types in this army create a lot of new ways that you have to approach each encounter, and the whole experience is so much greater because of that. About halfway through the game, you get to play through one of the coolest set pieces I've ever seen in a video game. 2 full chapters take place on this moving train, where you have to worry about the swarms of enemies, while also avoiding getting knocked off by the obstacles around it. What's really impressive about it is the fact that as it's moving, the environment around you actually changes. You start this section in the jungle area, but soon the tracks become surrounded by water, with mountains in the distance all around you. After that, you end up in an area full of snowy mountains, and if you didn't guess it by now, this is also where the game started. Oh, and I didn't even mention that for the second half of the train ride, you're also being attacked by a helicopter that you actually have to take down. This isn't the only time something this big happens either. There's also a chapter where you're hunted by a tank through an entire village, and one where you're hopping from car to car to try to save someone who's been taken from that village. There's so much more variety to the gunfights here, completely fixing the lack of it in the first game. One thing I never mentioned in my review of Uncharted 1 was the fact that the gunplay and climbing were always done separately. To change up gameplay even further, this game allows you to shoot while hanging. This means you'll be put in situations where you have to use what you're climbing on as cover during a fight, and it's just yet another way that Naughty Dog added to the variety of encounters here. If you saw my review on the first game, you know that one of my biggest problems with it was its lack of variety. Now we talked about how they fixed that in regards to the combat scenarios and enemy types, but one of my favorite things is how much they've diversified the environments. Uncharted 1 was almost entirely made up of jungles and ruins. I understand it's because that game was much smaller in scale, taking place entirely on one island, but that didn't make these environments become any less stale to look at. Uncharted 2, on the other hand, is a journey that spans over several parts of the world, and in turn is constantly giving you new and varied areas to explore. Jungle-type areas return, but along with them are snowy mountainous areas, an ancient monastery, urban war zones, dark caverns, icy caverns, and even an actual lost city this time. All of these areas are densely detailed and were pretty much the most visually impressive thing you could find in a console game at the time. That's not to say that they don't hold up today though, because I still find myself amazed by how well some of these still look even next to modern games. Granted, I am playing the remastered versions on the Nathan Drake collection, but still, they didn't look much worse on the PS3. While this game still doesn't offer much to warrant multiple playthroughs, it's a lot more likely that you'll want to just to see these levels again. The upgrades made to the encounters and environments also mean that playing this game on harder difficulties is actually enjoyable. It's still really challenging at times, but in a much better way since this game isn't as clunky as the first one. The last area of this game is the lost city known as Shambhala. It was great to see that this time there actually was a lost city to find and not just a golden statue. I'm actually really glad that happened in the first game, because it made it so much more shocking to see something like this now. Shambhala is one of the first things that pops into my head when I think about Uncharted 2, and you can probably see why. I still remember being amazed seeing those gates open, revealing this beautiful final area. This is also one of the harder parts of the game if you're playing on Crushing. The Guardians are challenging to take on, but what I'm really talking about is the final boss. While I don't really expect to have any sort of boss encounters in a game like this, the one from the last game was pretty annoying and disappointing. The fight against Lazarevich, on the other hand, is a pretty awesome way to end this game. This fight is pretty challenging even on regular modes, but playing this on Crushing difficulty was one of the most tense things I've ever experienced in a video game. I would rather put a toothpick under my toenail and kick a wall than go through this again. Heck, I'd suffer less watching Glee. It doesn't help that I found out later there's an exploit you can use to make this fight a complete joke. I just want you guys to know that I did this fight legit, okay? I did it legit. After you defeat Lazarevich, the lost city of Shambhala begins to fall to pieces, and you have to run across a collapsing bridge to escape. Once you get back across, you have to watch Elena die in your arms. No, not really, but it looks that way until the next cutscene that has one of the funniest conversations in the game.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how scared were you that I was gonna die?
4.
4?
Yeah, why?
A 4.
Yeah.
You were at least an 8.
An 8?
You were a total 8.
An 8? Those Guardian things were an 8.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, those were terrifying.
What's a 10?
Clowns?
Clowns over my death?
I hate
Clowns?
clowns. I hate clowns.
Oh my word. You thought I was dead.
I'll give you a 5. How's that?
So that about wraps up my thoughts on Uncharted 2. The gameplay is so much less repetitive than before, the story is a lot more complex, and the characters have more layers to them. Naughty Dog did an amazing job at improving over the first game in every way, and their efforts resulted in an experience that still holds up to today's standards. I give Uncharted 2 Among Thieves a 9 out of 10. I want to thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed, I ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And I hope to see you next time when I review Uncharted 3 Drake's Deception. Until then, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.